Good day, Pilipinas. This is Maricel Casinio Rivera. Welcome to Overtime with Atty Oca Moreno. Today, let's talk about the shutdown of Rappler. And let's also talk about the Philippine Depositary Receipts. What are these? And its attributes. And is the shutdown of Rappler an attack to press freedom? Quite heavy. Let's talk about that. Atty Oca Moreno, sir.
Actually, it's not really complicated, no? There are what you call attributes of ownership. Whenever you own a thing, that ownership carries with it attributes. The right to use, to possess, the right to to the fruits, the right to the fruits, and the right to dispose. No, that's very basic in civil law. Now, this has to do with shares of stock. Let's limit the discussion to one share of stock. That share of stock is a share of stock represents ownership of of an interest in a corporation. A corporation has shares of stocks, and the owners of the shares of stocks are supposed to be the owners of the corporation. Okay, now a share of stock is represented by a certificate, no? So whoever owns the shares of stock is the owner of the corporation. Okay? Now, let's suppose that there are 100 shares of stocks. Okay? So if you own 100, then you wholly own the corporation. If you own 50 of those 100, then you own 50% of that corporation. Now, the Constitution says that mass media have to be wholly owned by Filipinos. So if a mass media corporation must be, if it issues 100 stocks, all the 100 stocks must be owned by a Filipino citizen or a corporation wholly owned by Filipinos. There was a rule before when they would even apply in regard to nationality requirement. They would even apply the grandfather rule. The grandfather rule that was applied before in the case of banks and those other corporations which are subject to statutory or constitutional ownership rules. So, for instance, under the grandfather rule, if a share of stock is owned by a corporation, then the owner corporation is the father. If that owner corporation is in turn owned by another corporation, then the owner of that first corporation is the grandfather. So you look into the citizenship of the grandfather. So let's say A corporation is owned by B corporation, and B corporation is owned by C corporation. So when the law says that A corporation has to be 100% owned by Filipinos, then all the owners, if they are corporations, should also be 100% owned by Filipinos. That was the grandfather rule test before. But that has been long relaxed. No, as early as 1980s, if I'm not mistaken. So in that same example I gave, if A corporation is owned by B corporation and B is owned by C corporation, it's enough that B corporation is owned 60% by Filipinos. In other words, C corporation is 60% Filipino. Okay. Now, that's as far as the grandfather rule test. Now, there is also another dimension that you have to look into, and this has been done as early as more than 20 years ago, Sel. You know, in the case of stock corporations, as a corporation issues either voting stocks or preferred stocks, okay? Preferred stocks are also stocks representing ownership in a particular corporation. The only difference is that preferred stocks are non-voting. So you can structure a corporation as having voting stocks, a stocks class A, or another class, say class B, where the voting stocks are only the class A stocks. So in regard to ownership, because ownership also implies control. And control is exercised by voting. So if, let's say, I am an owner of a voting stock, I control that corporation. On the other hand, if you also own preferred stocks, even if you have more preferred stocks, that does not defeat my ownership of the voting stocks because I control when is voting exercised? Voting is exercised, say, in the election of the board of directors. And under the corporation law, the affairs of the corporation are handled by the board of directors. And who elects the board of directors? The owners of the voting stocks. And it varies, no? There's a cumulative way of, but that's another angle altogether. So, okay, we've discussed earlier about grandfather rule, and grandfather rule is usually applied in regard to strict constitutional and statutory requirements. However, that has been relaxed way back. Another issue is who exercises control. Because the one who exercises control, voting control, is the owner of the corporation. So between an owner of a voting stock and an owner of a non-voting stock, say a preferred stock, it is the owner of the voting stock who controls the corporation. Preferred stock, there are differences, but the major difference between a voting stock and a preferred stock is in the case of a preferred stock, there is preference in the liquidation. There is preference in the payment out of the assets of the corporation. That's why it's called preferred. While the voting stock, you have to first settle the creditors, those with preferred stocks, and then the balance. That's when the common stocks the owners of the common stocks get. No, another difference is that a preferred stock has no voting rights generally, while a voting stock, common stock, has voting rights, and that. The difference lies in that, So you have nationality requirement. If the stock is a preferred stock, it does not violate the control, the ownership rule or statutory ownership rule, for as long as it is preferred stock. Okay, now. This issue pertaining to Rappler has to do with, I think, common stocks. But, as early as 1990, 1995, I was in the private sector then, it has already been established. It has already been established. Now, Sel, you have this depository receipt, okay? Now, this depository receipt can pertain to essentially a depository receipt represents an ownership, an undivided ownership in a whole that is held by a trustee. Okay? So a depository receipt can refer to, let's say you have 1,000 hollow blocks. Let's talk about tangible things like hollow blocks, no? Or 1,000 bags of cement. The bags of cement, let's say 1,000 bags of cement, are deposited in a trustee, and the trustee issues a depository receipt. There is in deposit with me 1,000 bags. Now, the owner of that depository receipt can issue participation certificates. No, I can issue participation certificate to somebody and tell him you have 20 of these 1,000 bags, and then I can issue another depository receipt to another person. You have 200 of these 1,000 bags, and so on and so forth. That arrangement refers to tangible things like 1,000 bags of cement. A depository receipt can also refer to shares of stocks. What happens is shares of stocks of a particular corporation or group of corporations are held by a trustee. Trustee is usually a bank. Okay? And then the trustee issues participation certificates. And then the participation certificates they become investment instruments for investors. So if an investor buys a depository receipt, that investor technically is an owner of the number of stocks mentioned in that depository receipt. But the shares of stocks are held by a trustee corporation. Okay, now, the difference in the case of Rappler is, the depository receipt pertains not to the ownership of the stocks. It pertains not to the ownership of the stocks. All of it, with all the attributes that the stocks carry, or that the ownership carries. But it pertains only to the ownership of the fruits of those stocks. The fruits of those stocks are essentially the dividends that are paid from time to time by the issuing corporation. So, a depository receipt pertaining to the dividends of the stocks that are held by a trustee merely represents an interest in the financial aspect of that ownership. But it does not pertain to the voting control of those stocks. So it is not an ownership in the way that the ownership is defined in the statutory nationality requirement. Okay? That's how the Rappler PDRs have been structured. Now, there are many ways. It's essentially a depository receipt. A depository receipt is an instrument evidencing ownership in a particular group of assets held by a trustee. You know, there are many forms of depository receipts. One is you have the global depository receipts. Global depository receipts are distributed worldwide. That's why they are called global. You also have American depository receipts. American depository receipts are issued in respect of American corporations and issued by American trustees. And the Philippine depository receipt pertains to Philippine shares of stocks. Now, the crux of the issue is, does the ownership of a PDR, a Philippine Depositary Receipt, pertaining to a mass media corporation mean by itself as ownership in a mass media corporation to which that PDR represents or pertains? That is the question. The answer is yes, but only with regard to the financial fruits of that stock. But in regard to voting control, which is the main essence of ownership, it does not. So it has always been accepted that shares of stocks of mass media corporations can be, interest can be acquired by foreigners, but not in regard to the voting control. It's the same as, for instance, ownership of land. Okay, ownership of land. The Constitution limits ownership of lands to Filipinos or to Filipino corporations. Question: can a foreigner be a mortgagee of a land in the Philippines? A mortgagee. They say, I am a Filipino and I borrow from a foreigner and I mortgage the land in his favor. Now, mortgage is not ownership. Mortgage is merely a security to a particular credit transaction. So the answer to that question is, a foreigner can be a mortgagee of a land in the Philippines. However, if the Filipino borrower defaults, the foreigner cannot own the land. He has to foreclose the mortgage and he cannot bid in the auction of that land. Okay? So, you know, the decision saying that the PDRs violate the constitutional and statutory requirements, I of course, with all due respect, I disagree. I disagree. Because, like I said, the PDR pertains only to the financial fruits of the shares of stocks of the corporation, which is on the dividends. So the investor buys interest in the PDR on a mass media corporation looking at the dividend rate that the corporation declares or pays out to its stockholders. And it may very well be that those stocks are preferred stocks, with all the more reason, because preferred stocks are non-voting stocks.
SEC alleged that Rappler's parent company intentionally created an elaborate scheme to cover an investment from a foreign source. But you're saying that those are only the financial fruits of the shares of stocks, and these are the dividends.
No, that elaborate scheme has become a normal scheme as early as 1990s, and it was recognized internationally. There had been opinions issued in that regard that ownership in regard to the dividend flow of these stocks is not ownership of the stocks itself. It's not elaborate. It's pretty simple. Sometimes, of course, the pooling of funds is also used for, in securitization. And securitization is it's also similar to PDR or the GDR, Global Depository Receipt, or like I said, the only difference in whether it's global or American or Philippine is who issues it and under what laws, what jurisdiction are they issued. Now, securitization, for instance, that this was the case. You have real estate developers, okay? You have, let's say, a real estate developer. The traditional practice has always been, let's say I'm the real estate developer. I would develop, say, a subdivision and with, let's say, 100 units or 100 lots, no? I would sell the 100 lots either in cash or in installment or now, okay, usually purchase of lands is done in installments. Or if there is a bank, then it's paid upfront, it's paid in full. And then you pay the bank in installments. Okay? Now, so it has always been the case that real estate subdivisions are sold in installments. And so the real estate developer holds a contract to sell that is payable, say, in 10 years or 20 years. And then usually the real estate developer would hold on to the promissory note, to the contract to sell, and just wait for the payments to be made over the agreed period of time. That was before. Then came the securitization. What did the securitization do? You know, what it did was somebody else, let's say in your case, you're the investor. I would, let's say for the 100 units that I have developed with 100 contracts to sell, payable over, say, 20 years, instead of waiting for 20 years for me to get paid, I would sell my receivables to you. Okay, you purchase my receivables. And then, so what happens is you step into my shoes. You become the owner now of those receivables. So the payments now will have to go to you over 20 years. Now, question, why would you want to do that? There are many reasons why you would want to do that. Let's say for investment purposes, you may prefer to have an asset that is long, okay, because you're rich and you have the liquidity to hold on to these assets, and that of course you'll buy that at a discount.
Yeah.
You will buy that at a discount. You'll not buy it at the same face value that because you would not gain anything. So you will have to buy it at a discount. And why do I sell it? Because I'm able to liquefy. So with the liquefaction, with the sale of the receivables, the proceeds of that sale, I can use to build another subdivision. Okay? So securitization. But that pertains to receivables. Whereas in this case, PDR pertains to shares of stocks. But essentially, the pooling of the assets are the same. In a PDR over real estate receivables, the pooling is also done with the trustee. Securitization, the example I gave, let's say you want to buy, but you want to sell what you have bought. Okay? The set of receivables that I have. You want to buy them, but then you want to also sell. So that is what you call securitization. You'd buy all my receivables, and then what you do is you'll ask me to deposit the receivables in a trustee bank called the trustee bank, and then all these receivables are pooled together. They are pooled together. And then what happens is that the trustee bank issues certificates of participation. That certificate of participation saying that the investor is owner of 10% of all the receivables that are pooled in the trustee bank. So you could be the buyer and at the same time the organizer, the promoter of the securitization. So you would buy it, you would buy the receivables and then pool them together, and then ask the trustee bank to issue certificates of participation that you will then sell. So there are investors. And why would investors find that interesting? Because the price, you don't have to buy all of the receivables. You can buy only a portion of those receivables, which is essentially affordable. Much more affordable than buying all of the receivables in one instance. So that's securitization. And securitization is very much similar to a Philippine Depositary Receipt.
Now, at this time, sir, what could be Rappler's available remedies?
They will go to the courts. The decision of the Securities and Exchange Commission, because corporations are subject to the jurisdiction of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And what the SEC has ruled was that, Rappler violated the constitutional and the statutory ownership rules, no? So Rappler will now have to go to the Court of Appeals and then eventually to the Supreme Court. And the court will then resolve on the whether the interest bought by the investor is an interest that represents ownership, and ownership is control, which is voting. Now, of course, the certificate participation is structured in such a way that what is being bought is not the voting right, but rather the right to the dividend, which is one of the attributes of the ownership in shares of stocks. Let's say, okay, I own this cell phone. What are my attributes of ownership? The right to use it, possess it, and the right to dispose it, the right to encumber it. I can sell it, but you know, the Rappler thing is, I'm not selling all of it. I'm only selling, let's say, for instance, the right to listen to, let's say, the right to make a phone call. So I can tell you, okay, sell. You can buy, you can make a call, but you can pay me whenever you make a call. You can. That is just one of the attributes of my ownership in this cell phone.
Many things have been said about the Rappler issue. In fact, even the former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton said that this is a disservice to the Philippines. Do you think that this is an attack to press freedom, Attorney Oca?
Of course, certainly. And it is clearly enshrined in the Constitution. Freedom of the press shall not be abridged. Press freedom. Freedom of speech. That is part of freedom of speech.
Yeah. And, former United States Secretary of State Hillary Clinton also said in her tweet, no? She mentioned about it, and she said that the people of the Philippines deserve sources of news and information that will tell them the truth. And Rappler and tells the truth.
Which is especially now. You have CNN, BBC, they're all over the country. No, they are also mass media. They are also mass media. And they are foreign established. But because of the magic of telecommunication, they can be seen, heard, enjoyed here in the Philippines. So that is a reality that you have to look into.
Yeah. And so that's it. And I think this issue for
it's going to take some time.
Do you think this will still reach the Supreme Court?
Yes. In the meantime, the decision of the Court of the Securities and Exchange Commission is not executory. So Rappler is not obligated to close down. The decision has been made, but that decision is still subject to appeal process. Rappler can now go to the Court of Appeals and eventually to the Supreme Court. It is only when the Supreme Court rules with finality that a particular issue is deemed judicially determined with finality.
Yeah. So for now, they can still continue
Of
to
course,
operate
yes,
as a news
yes.
source.
It's just I just am amazed with the timing of that decision, because that decision was issued right before the end of the term of the previous president.
Yeah.
No, I think November 29 or something. Yeah, just before the end. The decision of the SEC came before President Bongbong Marcos took his oath of office.
June 28. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other day.
The timing.
The timing.
I'm just amazed with the timing. But I'm not saying anything more. I'm just amazed with the timing.
Yeah. How are your hopes, sir, regarding the recognition of press freedom in the next administration?
Well, of course, without press freedom, President BBM would not have been president.
You think so?
Of course, there was a popular uprising against the Marcoses 36 years ago in 1986. But because press freedom, the freedom of speech, are guaranteed by the Constitution, in the 1987 Constitution, and held and respected by the country, no, all these public speeches and public statements about the Marcoses, about the he would not have been. They would not have gone back, or they would not have been elected way back if the country had been without press freedom. Yeah. How not, I would not want to use the word ironic, but that's the beauty of press freedom. I would look at it in a positive way. In martial law, there was limited press freedom. Martial law was overcome in 1986, and with that defeat of martial law, press freedom and other freedoms were restored.
Thank you very much, Attorney Oca Moreno. Thank you for your time and your insights. See you again in our next episode here at Overtime.